See, all right. That it? Y'all want to go? Okay, we're in First Kings. We are in chapter 9, and we are at verse 10. And now Solomon has offered up his big prayer to God that we spent a long time on, because there was all these really interesting pieces to that, theologically interesting, that kind of caught us by surprise when Solomon twice says, "There is no one who does not sin." See, even from the earliest times, the Jews understood that about people, right? That there is no one who does not sin. The darkness in the human heart is carried in us all, and from it we have to be rescued by God. So we got Solomon's prayer, we got the dedication of the temple with all the big sacrifices and everything, and then we had the Lord appearing to Solomon, right? And reiterating this covenantal promise. It is a covenantal promise that has two sides. That's what you need to see from Mount Sinai to forward. A covenantal promise that has two sides. It's not just about what God will do. It is about what the people will do. God is to be faithful to the people. God is to keep God's end of the deal, but the people are to be faithful to God. They are to keep their end of the deal, and out of that will come the salvation of humanity and the renewal of creation. And the Old Testament story is largely the story of the people's unwillingness to do that, right? So when you come to these places, you always have to see the if-then part of it. You know, if you do your part, then all these blessings are going to fall out of you. If you do not, then there's all consequences to it. Because of course, if we lead our life in ways that we are not built for, if we lead our lives in ways of, I'll use an old word, wickedness. You know, wickedness doesn't have to be a gigantic thing. They could be small things. Small things could do terrible harm to people. There are consequences to those choices to do the wrong thing, to make a choice that God would not wish us to make. So, but now we're going to get a little bit about some of Solomon's other activities, because remember, he is king of Israel, before we get to the Queen of Sheba. I don't know why I find the Queen of Sheba such an interesting character, but I can remember as a kid, like even on the playground, you would occasionally hear somebody say, "Oh, you just think you're like the Queen of Sheba." Or I'm going like, what? You know, I didn't even know there was a Queen of Sheba. Didn't know it was a Bible reference at the time. Anyway, okay. So let's just plunge in, all right? Can y'all hear me fine? Okay. At the end of 20 years, a lot of time has been passing, right? Because these big construction projects take a long time. Herod the Great began the construction of the great temple in Jerusalem before Jesus was born, and it's finished just in time for the Romans to knock it down in about 70 AD. So the construction projects take a long time. At the end of 20 years, during which Solomon built these two buildings, the temple of Yahweh and the royal palace. One second. King Solomon gave 20 towns in Galilee to Hiram, king of Tyre, because Hiram had supplied him with the cedar and juniper and gold that he wanted. Now, that's kind of a funny thing to me. Okay, so you give somebody you give him these towns, so he is collecting the taxes and other things from that town. But I can't help but wonder if these towns contained Israelites. And is Solomon actually moving some of his fellow Israelites over to King Hiram of Tyre, who is not an Israelite, who is not one of God's people? And I'm thinking to myself, well, You know, if there's some of that going on, that's not good. But when Hiram went from Tyre to see the town Solomon had given him, he wasn't pleased with them. He said, "What kind of towns are these that you have given me, my brother?" he asked. And he called them the land of Kabul, a name they have to this day. Now Hiram had sent to the king 120 talents of gold. So Hiram feels like the exchange here is not fair. Have you noticed how many kids say, "That's not fair. That's not fair. That's not." It's a hard thing to try to convince your kids that, first of all, you don't want to hear that coming out of their mouth again. Secondly, life isn't fair. Nobody said life was fair. So Hiram, 120 talents of gold is almost an unimaginable amount of money. If somebody has a calculator, you could, and knows the price of gold today, might figure out an approximation of this. A talent of gold was something like 66 pounds of gold. So if you convert it into ounces, and the ounces times the price of gold, and you multiply it by 120, you get a very large amount of money.
75 pounds.
What?
75 pounds.
So, okay, 66, 75.
Hey.
Hey.
Would you want those
Tomato. The issue is, if Lauren looks someplace else, she'd find a different number, because when it comes to the weights and measures in your Old Testament, we're not really sure what they are, in part because they weren't standardized, right? You don't have to go back very far in history to find a time when weights and measures were not standardized like they are now. You know, today an ounce is an ounce is an ounce is an ounce. Go back a few hundred years, that's not the case. So, yes?
per ounce today? Gold is $3,031.57 per ounce.
$3,000. I missed that little opportunity there. Okay, so, yeah, go do the math. Somebody, anyway, it's okay. I'm just kidding. I'm just saying, I just want you to understand that Hiram gave Solomon a lot. And so, what do you think it means? There's some tension between Solomon and Hiram then, right? Because Hiram feels like, yeah, I don't know, he got kind of slighted or something. But in any event, here is the account of the forced labor King Solomon constructed to build Yahweh's temple, his own palaces, the terraces, the wall of Jerusalem, and Hazor, Megiddo, and Gerar. And I read that sentence, and what do I say to myself? Forced labor? Really? That's where we are? Forced labor? What's happening in this kingdom? Forced labor. Okay. I mean, I know how the world worked then, but these are the Israelites. Now we get an aside. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had attacked and captured Gezer. He had set it on fire, and he killed its Canaanite inhabitants, and then gave it as a wedding gift to his daughter, Solomon's wife. And Solomon rebuilt this town, Gezer. So that's the story. So how did Solomon end up with it? It was a wedding gift. Okay. I don't know that any of this is, for me, adding up to what I would think how God would want his people to live. I understand it's very real world, but
They mentioned Megiddo in here.
yeah, Megiddo is one of the places mentioned. Megiddo is a very ancient place. It is, today it's this mounded. It's this big, gigantic mound, and you can, it's sort of a tell, kinda, sort of, and the most biblical significant part of it is the fact that it is Har Mageddon. Har Megiddo. Okay, it is the place that in Revelation is seen as the place of the climactic battle between the forces of good and evil. Sorry, I got a tickle. And if you've been to Israel with Patty and me, sometimes we go to Megiddo, sometimes we don't. It just depends on what we want to do. And anyway, now back to verse 17. He built up Lower Beth Horon. He built up Bala and Tador in the desert within his land, as well as all his store cities and the towns for his chariots and for his horses, wherever he desired, whatever he desired to build in Jerusalem, in Lebanon, and throughout all the territory he ruled. So he is building. He has a lot of resources. He has a lot of money. Israel, the kingdom of Israel, is at the zenith of its wealth, the zenith of its power. There wouldn't be another builder like this until Herod the Great came along. Herod the Great was only called the Great because of the big projects he built, right? Like Masada, like the port at Caesarea, like the temple and the courtyards and the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And so, what? Herodium, yes?
And a lot of that still stands.
Oh, yeah. One of the most amazing ones that people don't know about is a place called Herodium that Patty reminded me of. Herodium is basically a mountain that's built on flat ground by Herod. And it was thought that he did it to give himself a place to be buried. So anyway, but people don't agree about whether he's really there or not. Well, there were still people from the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and Jebusites. These people were not Israelites. And Solomon conscripted the descendants of all of these people remaining in the land, whom the Israelites could not, what? Exterminate. To serve as slave labor as it is to this day. This is the way the world worked. I understand that. When the Israelites returned to Canaan under Joshua, there were lots of people already living there. But this business of slave labor and exterminating everybody, you could say, and Christians often do when they come to these passages, well, God is going to make sure that his people go forward. And so it's kind of like you got to get rid of the cancer so that the body can live and stuff. And I don't know. I read it and it points me toward the need for Jesus and the full revelation of who God is. But Solomon did not make slaves of any of the Israelites. They were his fighting men. They were his government officials. They were his officers, his captains, the commanders of his chariots and charioteers. They were also the chief officials in charge of Solomon's projects. 550 officials supervising those who did the work. What does this remind? Is this reminding you of anything?
No.
What?
Our government.
Pat says our government today. Well, I don't think we're exactly using slave labor. But what biblical moment does this remind you of? Egypt, because it was the Hebrews. It was these people's ancestors who were enslaved by Pharaoh and forced into slave labor, forced into this forced labor by Pharaoh. And so I just say all this just so we we realize that just because something happens as it does in the Old Testament, that doesn't make it right. Okay? God's people have always, still do, will struggle with getting things right. And I would submit that slave labor is not a way. And they should know this better than anyone. Better than anyone. But anyway, King Solomon also built ships at on Geber, which is near Elah, in Edom, on the shore of the Red Sea. And Hiram sent his men, sailors who knew the sea, to serve in the fleet with Solomon's men, because the Jews, the Israelites, they were not seafaring people. But Hiram is, because his land is up where Lebanon is now, up on the Mediterranean coast. So Hiram still sends men down to help sail. They sailed to Ophir and brought back 420 talents of gold, which they delivered to King Solomon. So this would be a gift. This would be a tribute to the wonderful King Solomon. The gold is just pouring in. 420 talents is unimaginable. Multiply that by the numbers that y'all were throwing out of me earlier in terms of pounds and gold prices and stuff. Yowzer. Okay? Man. Well, little surprised is it then that when the Queen of Sheba, here she is, heard about the fame of Solomon and his relationship to Yahweh, she came to test Solomon with hard questions. What an interesting sentence. She's from a distance away. I found a map. I did some research on, where do we think Sheba was? The land Sheba. And people don't all agree, but I guess there's some general consensus that Sheba is down there at the southern end of the Saudi Arabian peninsula. So who's down there today? What? You got it. The Houthis are down there today. Yeah, that's where they are. But at this time, thousands of years ago, a lot of people think that's where Sheba is. And she is the Queen of Sheba. Now, she has heard about Solomon's success, right? His wealth. She's also heard of Yahweh. She's not in a place where she would typically hear of Yahweh. And I'm reminded of the prostitute in Joshua 2 who helps the Israelite spies because she has heard of Yahweh and his power. So the Queen of Sheba has heard of the wealth, she's heard of Yahweh, and she must have heard about Solomon's wisdom, because she's going to come up and ask him some hard questions. I don't know if she likes to get questions or not. She may not like it as much as I do, but anyway, she's going to come up and ask him hard questions. So arriving at Jerusalem with a very great caravan, with camels carrying spices, large quantities of gold and precious stones, she came to Solomon and she talked with him about all she had on her mind. She is a queen, right? So does she see herself as Solomon's equal? Darn tootin'. So she's going to go up. She's not going to hold back. She's going to tell him what's on her mind. Sure. So Solomon answered all her questions. Nothing was too hard for the king to explain to her. And when the Queen of Sheba saw all the wisdom of Solomon and the palace he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his officials, the attending servants in their robes, his quarters. How did she see his quarters? Cupbearers? Okay, not quarters, cupbearers, Patty says. Okay, it looked like quarters to me. I'm sorry. Maybe my mind was going to a place it shouldn't be. Do you think? But following that line, Do you think she might have known what his quarters looked like? I don't know. So anyway, his cupbearers, Patty says, and the burnt offerings he made at the temple of Yahweh, she was what? Overwhelmed. What?
I'd say hot. She was pretty hot.
Was she pretty hot, you think?
Yeah, she was.
Yeah. Kind of foxy?
She saw Charles.
Oh, gosh, I'm not sure what you said, but why do you think she was hot? Queen of Sheba, exactly. Who would you have play the Queen of Sheba in a movie? Yeah, okay. So she said to the king, so here's what she says. She said to the king, the report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true. Now these are the writings of the Israelites for the Israelites, right? And so all of this is extolling the capabilities and success and virtues of their ancestral kings. Solomon, right? This is like I said, it's the trend from Saul to David to Solomon in terms of earthly power and wealth is unmistakable. And it's not going to last beyond the death of Solomon. So she says to the king, but I didn't believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told to me. In wisdom and wealth you have far exceeded the report I heard. How happy your people must be. How happy your officials who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom. Praise be to Yahweh your God, because he is her God. Now, does she think there's one God? No. Does Solomon think there's one God? No. No. They are that monotheism thing is still to come. It emerges, I think, in the story of Elijah. But right now they do believe they have the best God on the block, and this God is jealous of the other gods, so they're only to have no other God before them. All that is actually, in the Ten Commandments, God isn't talking about like an American Express card or a fancy car. God is saying, no, these other gods that you think exist, you are to have no other God before me. I am a jealous God. Because the people believe that there are these other gods. So, there we go. Yes?
Why does it say praise be to the Lord your God?
Because in the Hebrew, underneath the word Lord is God's name. And every time in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew, it's God's name. The Jews would only say Adonai, which means Lord. And so by convention, in English translations, we simply use the word Lord there rather than God's name. That's all it is. Okay? So I think she knows what God's name is. I mean, you meet other gods, they don't exist, but the people believe there are other gods like Baal, Ashtaroth, Astarte. You'll see in the Old Testament story that they go chasing after them. So, oh gosh, I lost my place. Thank you, my dear. Okay. Praise be to Yahweh, your God, who has delighted in you and placed you on the throne of Israel. Because of Yahweh's eternal love for Israel, he has made you king to maintain justice and righteousness. So right away you know what? That the kings of Israel were to maintain justice and righteousness. Righteousness is doing right. It's not complicated. Who determines what is right from wrong? God. Doing right is doing right as God sees it. because God is goodness. God is righteousness. And justice is one of the key tenets of that God would have us live by. Remember the famous verse in Micah, which are still hundreds of years of getting to, but when it says, what does God require of you? But to do justice, love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. So God does call us to live in a just society, in a just world. All right?
Hey, Scott.
Yes.
I think verse 6 and 7 could probably be a sermon every single Sunday. Like, it's just so cool that it says, I heard about you. I heard about your wisdom. Not only is it true, but I didn't believe it until I saw it with my own eyes. Like, that is so us. Isn't it?
It is
It's
us.
so
See,
awesome.
she's heard about it, but she wants to come and see it for herself. Right? It's one of the things that makes that prostitute Rahab so remarkable in Joshua 2, that she provides shelter and protection to the Israelite spies, but she's only heard it. She's just heard about this God who was so powerful and the things she had done. Queen of Sheba, makes the trip up because she wants to see it with her own eyes. So it is, I guess it's, of course we want to see. We want more. We want assurance. We want more evidence. We want more confirmation. And Queen of Sheba is no different. Verse 10. And she gave the king 120 talents of gold, large quantities of spices and precious stones, and never again were so many spices brought as the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. So his wealth is just growing. Oh my. Another aside, Hiram's ships brought gold from Ophir, and from there they brought great cargoes of almwood and precious stones. The king used the almug wood to make supports for the temple of Yahweh and for the royal palace, and to make harps and lyres for the musicians. So much almug wood has never been imported or seen to this day. You know, it's just the top. That's what you're supposed to get. This is not complicated. This is easy. This is the top. King Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba all she desired and asked for, besides what he had given her out of his royal bounty. And so they've showered gifts on each other, and they've, really just this big extravagant outpouring of mutual admiration. Then she left and returned with her retinue to her own country. And that's the Queen of Sheba. Well, she made one visit, she's from a long way away. I mean, there's a lot of sand between Jerusalem and Sheba. But she came. Yes. Okay, so we have two Bibles that disagree here about what?
Whether or not, all the things she asked for, if one of them was to have his child.
And where do they get?
It said the Ethiopians have a tradition according to which all that she desired included an heir who later became king of Ethiopia, establishing the dynasty of David.
Okay.
And his Bible says that's not true, but it refers to it.
Okay, so where in the text would we find any reference to her doing the deed with King Solomon?
10:13. And it's kind of all that she desires.
Okay, so let's see. So we have two Bibles that disagree about whether or not King Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba all she desired and asked for. But where does it say that she asked for a child by him?
It says that is a Ethiopian
Ah, an Ethiopian tradition. Well, leprechauns are a tradition. So, so I don't know. I'm with the Bible that says, no, it's a tradition. But some people think that because, they would like to grab onto some of the lineage, but the lineage, she's not mentioned in anywhere. If you go to the genealogy of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, do you find the Queen of Sheba in there somewhere? Does she insert herself some? No, you don't. So I would say, as we hew to the text, and I'm with the Bible that says, no, that's a tradition, that's fine, but there's nothing really in the text that indicates that.
However, Scott,
Yes?
he did have 700 wives and 300
Well, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. Okay. Hang on there. Okay. Now. Okay. All right. So the weight of the gold that Solomon received yearly was 666 talents. Right? 666. Oh! I once had a Texas license plate that began 666. Twice I had notes on my windshield that said, how do you like having the number of the devil? And I'm thinking, well, I guess I don't like it at all. There's no connection to anything. The weight of there may be some theological meaning to 666 here, but it has nothing to do with Revelation. The weight of the gold that Solomon received was 666 talents, a huge, unthinkable amount of money, not including the reserves or the revenues from merchants and traders from all the Arabian kings and the governors of the territories. Oh man, King Solomon is just on top of the world. He made 200 large shields of hammered gold. 600 shields of gold went in. 600 shekels of gold went into each shield. He also made the 100 small shields of hammered gold with 3 minas. That's another measure of weight of gold in each shield. The king put them all in the palace of the forest of Lebanon. Then the king made a great throne covered with ivory and overlaid with fine gold. The throne had 6 steps, and its back had a rounded top. On the sides of the seat were armrests with lions standing beside each one. 12 lions stood on the 6 steps. And now the 12 we can probably figure out. Why 12 and not 14 lions? What do you think? I'd bet it's 12 tribes. 12 lions stood on the 6 steps, and one at either end of each step. Nothing like it had ever been made for any other kingdom. This is the best of the best of the best. King Solomon's goblets were gold, and the household articles in the palace of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. Nothing was made of silver, because silver was considered of little value in Solomon's days. If you ask me, well, come on, Scott, there is some hyperbole here, isn't there? I mean, this kingdom didn't really come to the point of, like Egypt or Assyria or Babylon or Rome. And I'm going to say, no, of course not. So there is some hyperbole here. We are supposed to be getting the point beaten into us that this is the height of Israel's wealth and power in a worldly sense. And it's setting you up for what's to come. Yeah.
Is it a worldly view of their view? Is it a worldly view of an Eden-esque type of perception to create the sense of fall?
And is it what?
Is it a worldly view of an Eden-esque, so Garden of Eden? Is it to give you that sense it's so great, it's so beautiful, to set you up for the fall?
In a way, yes. I mean, I don't know that I make a direct connection to the Garden of Eden, but it's simply saying that what is it easy to admire in this world today? success measured in terms of money, wealth, power, wallets, right? Gold, all that stuff. Same thing then. And it is setting us up for a fall. That's going to come. And it's going to come. And for me as a Bible teacher, it's just all about the fact that the seeds of destruction will be planted out of this kingdom of enormous wealth and earthly power. Nothing was meant as silver because who wants silver? Come on. The king had a fleet of trading ships at sea, along with the ships of Hiram, and once every 3 years it returned carrying gold, silver, and ivory, and apes and baboons. You asked. King Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth. The whole world sought audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom God had put in his heart. Year after year, everyone who came brought a gift: articles of silver and gold, robes, weapons, spices, horses, mules. Solomon accumulated chariots, horses. He had 1,400 chariots, 12,000 horses, which he kept in the chariot cities and also with him in Jerusalem. For the king had made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones. That's how rich they are. Silver's like nothing. You would use it to put down so you kept the weeds out of your flower beds. That's what it is. As common as stones. And plentiful as sycamore and fig trees in the foothills. Solomon's horses were imported from Egypt and from Cush. I think it says Cush, I don't know. The royal merchants surpassed them from Cush, I guess, at the current price. They imported a chariot from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver. A shekel is a measure of weight. There's not coins as you think of coins yet. Okay? Everything's a measure of weight. 600 shekels of silver and a horse for 150. They also exported them all to the kings of the Hittites and the Arameans. And so, man, oh man, it's just the best. Chapter 11. Are we ready for chapter 11? Okay. I get that Solomon is what's that? King of the hill. Solomon is king of the hill. King Solomon. However, there are certain words you run to in the Bible that, well, they don't carry a lot of meaning. They don't. I mean, really. But some words just jump off the page. King Solomon, however. Oh my, he loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter. What sort of foreign women did Solomon love? He loved the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. You find them, he'd love them. They were from nations, they were from peoples about which Yahweh had told the Israelites, you must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods. And that is the great sin of Israel that will consume all of the rest of the Old Testament, is the people chasing after other gods, local gods, Canaanite gods, Egyptian gods. I don't care what kind of gods we're talking about. You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods. That these women would import their gods into Israel, and the Israelites would be seduced away from Yahweh to these foreign gods and goddesses, these pagan gods and goddesses, these gods and goddesses who don't exist, who are only made out of wood and stone and metal, right? But nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. This is the great why Solomon makes this huge, tragic, enormous mistake that is going to ruin everything. You know, you might say in your life, well, gosh, you know, can you really make mistakes that big? You can. I told Patty a story a few weeks ago about the fact that when I came down to Texas from B.F. Goodrich up in Akron, Ohio, I showed up for work, and my boss, who was the president of the bank, well, he like never came to see me. I didn't take it personally. But he eventually said, well, hey, let's meet for breakfast. And so we met for breakfast, and he said, Scott, I want you to take risks. My job is to make sure that you don't make mistakes we can't fix. So don't be afraid of making mistakes. My job is to make sure you don't make a mistake we can't fix. I said, okay, that's pretty cool, pretty good. I don't know that it worked out that way, but in any event, this is a huge mistake, and the only one who could keep Solomon from making it is God, and he ignores God. Notice when it says, notice how it's worded. God says, you must not intermarry. And then at the end of the verse, nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. Really? Is it love? Is it lust? How could you? We haven't even gotten that far, but we're about to. Now, he had 700 wives of royal birth. 700.
I think he numbered them. He couldn't remember all their names.
Number 12. Number 246. I don't know if I'm being asked if he numbered them. I don't know. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. Now that's 1,000. Okay, okay. 1,000 for the Hebrews is a number that means this. Here's what 1,000 means. It doesn't mean you're counting them off and you're numbering 998, 999, 1,000. I'm done. It means it's about as many as you could possibly imagine, and they are principally comprised of wives of royal birth. Okay. And then and those are all about cementing relationships. You know, all this stuff we've been reading, you know, like the daughter of Pharaoh. She's the quintessential example. He marries the daughter of Pharaoh, binds Israel and Egypt together, and then he starts marrying all kinds of other women. And then he has 300 concubines, or sometimes called second wives. Well, it is the way of this world. You know, kings had harems. David had a harem. David didn't have just one wife. David had a harem. And nothing to equal Solomon. Solomon's harem is beyond imagining. That's kind of what the 1,000 is meant to convey. And again, just because polygamy is practiced in the Old Testament, that doesn't mean it's God's desire for us. There are many things that happen in the Old Testament God doesn't want us to embrace. Polygamy among them. Okay? So, Solomon, what is the big problem with Solomon really that he's got 700 wives and 300 concubines? I mean, other than, you know, the drain on his energy. At the end of verse 3, his wives led him astray. You know, from Solomon's perspective, these wives come in. What is the religious, if we want to use that word, it's not really an appropriate word for this, but their like religious framework is around the gods or goddesses that they grew up with. And Solomon, I guess, he's a wise man. He knows that happy wife makes happy life. So he goes right along with it all, and before you know it, he is led astray. He is led astray himself. Verse 4, as Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods. I don't know. Old. I don't know. He spent 20 years building the 2 buildings, right? I know old. What's old? I don't really know how far in his reign he is. It's possible to figure it out, but I'll take it that he's just old. Age is not a number. Just kidding. Okay. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to Yahweh his God, as the heart of David his father had been. He followed, and here we meet some of these foreign gods and goddesses, these pagan gods and goddesses, who will be with us through the rest of the book of Kings, on through the rest of the Old Testament. You'll come across their names. He followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. Molech is a pagan god from what we know, to whom people offered human sacrifices. Yeah, exactly. If I could whistle, I would do that too. They followed Ashtoreth, and they followed Molech. Solomon, now, with the kings, you have these formulaic statements about them. Sometimes they're good, most of them are bad. Think of them as a report card. So after everything we've read about the Queen of Sheba and the money and the wealth and everything else, now he's going to get a report card from God. And what does the report card say? Oh, Solomon did evil in the eyes of Yahweh. He did not follow Yahweh completely as David his father had done. David made mistakes, but David was faithful to God. He was faithful to God. I mean, he didn't chase after other gods. He made big mistakes. Mistakes bigger than any of us are ever likely to make. But he stayed faithful to Yahweh. Solomon's mistake is that he turns away from Yahweh and starts chasing after Ashtoreth, Molech, and all the other gods on offer, in this world. Yes?
Solomon did believe there was one God.
No, Solomon did not believe there was one God. They are not monotheistic at this point.
Was David?
No, David's not monotheistic. I do not know. The fancy word is they were henotheistic, H-E-N-O, which means you believe you have the best God on the block, and you're to stay true to that God, but they don't believe there's only one. Which is why in the 10 Commandments, God says something like, you are to have no other gods before me. In the minds of the people to who were given those commandments in the 10, right, that is genuine. They do believe in the existence of a variety of gods and goddesses, but they are to stay true and faithful to Yahweh. And it is not until we get to the story of Elijah in 1 Kings 18 that we begin to see the people moving to monotheism. Now that is something Old Testament scholars can fight about all the time. Okay? I believe that they are still henotheistic, not monotheistic. That is still to come when they begin to understand that indeed there is only one God. But for now, when he goes chasing after Ashtoreth and Molech, as far as he's concerned, these are other gods on offer out there. It's kind of like going down to the used car lot. You got a Chevy, you got a Ford, you got a Chrysler, you got an Audi, and a Hyundai, and these other different cars on offer. There's lots of stuff on all these There's so many pagan gods. When you are in Jesus' day, what sets the Jews apart is they believe there's only one God, because they are monotheistic by then, had been for centuries. And they believe that this one God chose them. Nobody else thinks there's one God. Everybody else is polytheistic. They got big pantheons filled with gods and goddesses. All kinds of them. They think it's just wacko to think there's only one God. Everybody knows better. What?
So every time we see, like in the fourth verse, fully devoted to the Lord his God. That's his God, that's not.
His heart was not fully devoted to Yahweh, which is the Hebrew. Now, in English, we use the word Lord in the small caps above it. Okay, because we don't print the name of God out of respect for the Jews, who don't like to do that. So, his heart was not fully devoted to Yahweh, the God who had rescued them from Egypt. The only God that actually is. The God who will become fully revealed in Jesus. That's who Yahweh is. Okay? Okay, so again, just mark verse 6, and you'll see that little formulaic way of talking about the king. Because it doesn't matter how much money he has. It doesn't matter how much stuff he builds. It doesn't matter how much adoration he gets. It doesn't matter how many cupbearers he has. None of that. What matters is he faithful to God, and will he lead the people to God rather than away from God? And Solomon does not get a good report card. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. I'm guessing he just got totally caught up. Oh, I'm just so wonderful. Gosh, I love to lay in bed at night and think about all the wonderful things the Queen of Sheba had to say about me. Even though we did not have any carnal relations. Yeah, of course it is. We all can succumb to professions of adoration and a devotion, and be seduced into making bad choices by it. And we have to guard against it. We have to have friends who will speak the truth to us and help us come down a peg or two. Who's what?
Did you say he just went prodigal?
He just went what?
He just went prodigal.
He went like the prodigal son?
Just
Well, in a way, yeah. I mean, in a way, because what does it say? He was not fully devoted to Yahweh, and he did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And this evil is, the actionable content of it is the intermarrying with all of these foreign wives, because they represent the decline, the doom and decline of Israel, because you're going to see what's going to come of this. And it's not good. It's not good. Now, just to illustrate how far Solomon has gone, on a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place. That is an altar. In the ancient world, you built altars to lowercase g, God, at a high place. Because why? Because for them in their mindset, right, if the further you go up, the closer you are to God, because God's right up there. Whether it is Zeus or Ashtoreth or Molech, that's the realm of the gods up here. So you go from culture to culture, and they all would go to high places, the mountaintops, the hilltops, and build these altars. And if they don't have them, what do? They make their own mountains. That's what the ziggurats are in Babylon. That's what the pyramids are in Egypt. Right? And so now, on a hill, a high place, east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place. He built an altar, a place of worship. for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and from Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. These are, the gods and goddesses, the pagan gods and goddesses aren't all seen in the same way. You don't find like human sacrifice or things associated with every pagan gods and goddesses, but some you do. And these are two, especially Molech, that is believed that you do, that there was some practice of human sacrifice to Molech. So the detestable god Chemosh and the detestable god Molech, and he did the same for all his foreign wives who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods, meaning who worshiped their gods. He helped them all out. He built, I don't know how many it would take. He built a lot of these altars and places of worship for his wives to worship their gods and to offer sacrifice and incense to their gods, because happy wife makes happy life. Well, not surprisingly, Yahweh became angry with Solomon. And I probably think very disappointed. I can remember as a kid, there were times I made my mom, I was much closer to my mom than my stepdad. There were times I made my mom angry, but that wasn't the worst. The worst was when I made my mom disappointed. Ugh. So Yahweh became angry with Solomon because why? His heart had turned away from Yahweh, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. I mean, God's up in God's place and he's looking down and says, Solomon, I appeared to you twice. I don't do that for everybody. You understand? I don't do it. I came to you twice. And still, because you got all these women, and they bring in all of their pagan gods and goddesses, you're going to go chasing after them and you are turning away from me. All I'm seeing, Solomon, of you is your back. Not good. Although God, had forbidden Solomon to follow other gods, Solomon did not keep Yahweh's command. So Yahweh said to Solomon, since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, because the heart of them is being faithful. Faithful is such a powerful biblical word. Faithful, faithful, faithful. We are to be faithful to God. Jesus was faithful to Christ all the way to death, even death on the cross. We are to put our faith in Jesus. We are to be people who are faithful to others. Abraham, it says in a famous verse in chapter 15, Abraham faithed God. Not believed, not some intellectual thing. He faithed God. He trusted God. He put his faith in God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. But Solomon has taken that two-party covenant and now he's torn it. The most important part of it, he's cast aside. Since this is your attitude and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, which I commanded, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Nevertheless, for the sake of David your father, I will not do it during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. Yet I will not tear the whole kingdom from him, but I will give him one tribe for the sake of David my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen. Wow. So let me ask y'all, what kind of thoughts or questions do you have at this point? Because I kind of want to stop there, because this is this big climactic moment.
So
Ken Looney. Is Ken here? Is he online?
He's online. He wants to know, what do we think Sheba would think of him now?
What would Sheba think of him now? Well, if she knew what Solomon's decisions were leading to, she would be very disappointed as well, because the kingdom is going to begin to desperately fall apart, right? As a direct consequence of Solomon's decisions to abandon, to turn away from Yahweh and chase after these other gods. And when I say chase after them, I mean being willing to build worship places for them. Okay, so anything else?
It's a big punishment.
It is big, but it's a big sin. You know, it lies at the heart of what God is trying to accomplish, which is what? What is God trying to accomplish? Just think about it. Get in your helicopter and fly up real high and ask yourself, what is God trying to accomplish here? He's trying to accomplish the rescue of humankind and the renewal of all of God's creation. He came to Abraham and said, Abraham, all the families will be blessed through you. That's the project. And here Solomon has taken the project and he's tearing it apart and he's stomping on it. And that stomping on it is going to continue all the way through the Old Testament, necessitating what? For God to step in the person of Jesus, and do and be for Israel what Israel was unwilling to do and be for themselves. And hence, saving the world. Saving the world. So you can't ever lose sight of the larger project. The larger project is not really focused on just the Jews. They are the ones through whom God is working, because God is not a God of the magic wand. God chooses to work through us, now. God takes us seriously. God made us to be serious people. So you really, it's easy to kind of drift back into the little stories and lose sight of the larger project. And here it is. Solomon reaches the height of earthly power, and he takes the project and just tosses it away. It's a sad thing. Sad thing. So, other thoughts or questions? Yes, sir.
Why does God allow us to fail so deeply?
Why does God allow us to fail?
Yes.
Because God gives you the free will to do the right thing or the wrong thing. Because God treats you as a good, rational adult. If you want to be treated like a puppy, right? Because we don't blame puppies for things, even if they poop and pee all over the place, right? I mean, you can like, you wish they didn't do it, but we are these creatures that in the book of Hebrews, what does it say about us humans? That we're only a little bit lower than the angels.
We are created in His image. Why would He not create a being that would be able to follow that path?
Yep. Okay, so let's use a different word, because God did create us in His image. What does God want from us? What are the two great commandments according to Jesus? Love God and love others. For love to be love, it has to be freely given. And for love to be freely given, there has to be the opportunity to not love. Otherwise, it's a robotic love. You've trained your computer program to express love to you. So love implies both the ability to love and the ability to not love. And to not love God is what Solomon is doing, because he is refusing to be faithful to God and to listen to God. And you could say, well, maybe God should just make robots and they would all do the right thing. But who the heck wants to be loved by a robot? What does God want from us? What's the first commandment, Jesus says in response to the lawyer? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. God desires to be loved by us and to love us as he does. And that love, it just has to be where, yes, we can, freely given or withheld. And it's a tragedy when it is withheld. Otherwise, if we couldn't make any other, if we could only make the right choice and never the wrong choice, we would be like a computer program and a robot, a tin man, something. Anyway, very good. Yes. One more over here somewhere? Yes?
Scott, kind of to Andy's point earlier, like, so Solomon makes this big ginormous temple. Is that like, okay, this is the God I should be praying to, but oh, your God's cool over here, wife number one, and your God's cool over there, wife number two, and et cetera, et cetera. Is that kind of
You're going to ask me about Solomon's psychology, what happens to him? Because he builds the temple, he builds the palace, and then after all that's done, and all the world's riches are flowing in, and he's more fabulous than all the other kings of the earth, then we find out he's got 700 wives and 300 concubines, and they're foreign, and they're bringing all their gods in, and you realize, oh my gosh, it's all going to fall apart. So what do I think? Solomon is acting out of, oh, it's a good word. You know the word hubris? Hubris, right? The pride that goeth before the fall. He believes his own press releases. Right? Right. He believes his own press releases. And he's not coming to God with what kind of heart? A humble heart. A gentle heart. And he just thinks that what he wants is the very best. He cannot make a bad choice. Just look at everything I've gotten done. I make nothing but great choices. But he makes actually the most terrible choice of all with all of these women and the foreign gods and goddesses. I just think it's a story which illustrates human frailties that plague us all to this day and will until Jesus returns. One last little thing, my wife says.
Lynn Lawton put online, isn't it amazing that God came to Solomon and told him what a disappointment he was?
So Lynn Lawton, who's watching online, says, isn't it amazing that God came to Solomon and told him how disappointed he was? Because when you come to certain figures in the Old Testament, and Solomon's one of them, God's visited him twice, now God's coming to him here, it illustrates the kind of relationship that God wants to have with us, right? It is a real, honest, two-way relationship. And it's like when Abraham bargains with God over the fate of Sodom and Gomorrah. That kind of thing is just so shocking if you'll let it be, okay? That's who the creator of the cosmos does. He will basically let Abraham bargain him down over the fate of Sodom and Gomorrah? Well, yeah. So it's the God who is, the God we worship, the God fully revealed in Jesus Christ, the only God that there is deeply personal. A community of three, locked in love. And that is illustrated time and time again in the Old Testament, though we don't yet have in the Old Testament the Trinitarian understanding and the Trinitarian vocabulary that we would have once Jesus arrives. Okay? But you're right. Lynn's right. You still need to let yourself be wowed sometimes. So with that, we will come back next week and we will begin to see the disintegration of the kingdom of Israel. So, on that happy note, I'm going to pray us out of here. So, would you pray with me? Gracious Lord, as we leave here today, just hold us close. Help us, strengthen us in our faithfulness. Help us to be people of justice and righteousness. Help us to be the people that you created us to be. Help us to strengthen one another. Help us to be good enough friends so that we will point out to one another when we begin to get a little bit caught up with ourselves or impressed with ourselves. Because indeed, pride is the root of the tree, the poison tree, the tree of the vices, which are all about the life that you do not desire for us and that we should not seek, but which calls to us too often. So help us to be faithful and help us to come back here next Tuesday all ready to press on. We pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.